Positive. The word glared at me from the small digital window, a neon blue accusation against the gray slate of my master bathroom counter. I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. In my line of work, gasping is for amateurs. I am Catherine Blackwood. I have written 15 best-selling murder mysteries. I've spent decades constructing perfect crimes, weaving intricate webs of deceit, and burying fictional bodies in places no one would ever look. I know that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a knife, it's the detail that doesn't fit. And this pregnancy test, resting on the cold marble of my vanity, was a detail that didn't just break the pattern, it shattered the entire narrative. I am 58 years old. My womb retired from active duty over a decade ago. My husband, Dr. Jonathan Blackwood, the city's most godlike heart surgeon, is 62. Logic dictates this object should not exist in our home. Yet, I found it 10 minutes ago, tucked inside the side pocket of his vintage leather tennis bag, wrapped carelessly in a receipt for a smoothie. Amateur, I whispered to the empty room. My voice was calm, terrifyingly so. Outside, the wind off Lake Michigan howled against the limestone walls of our Gold Coast mansion, a brutal Chicago winter in full force. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of betrayal. I picked up the test. It felt light, insignificant, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. 35 years of marriage, 35 years of supporting his ego, polishing his reputation, and playing the role of the devoted surgeon's wife, and he throws it away for, what? Someone who uses drugstore diagnostics? The heavy oak front door slammed downstairs. Catherine, I've returned. Jonathan's voice boomed through the foyer. It wasn't a greeting, it was an announcement. The king had returned to his castle. He expected a fanfare, or at least a scotch on the rocks waiting for him. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Silver hair styled in a sharp bob, eyes that missed nothing. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like an editor who had just found a gaping plot hole in a manuscript, and I never let a plot hole survive. I dropped the test into the deep pocket of my silk robe. I didn't flush it. Evidence is sacred. In the library, Jonathan, I called out. My tone was smooth, perfectly modulated. The voice of a woman who knows nothing. I walked downstairs. Jonathan was standing by the fireplace, warming his hands. He looked impeccable, even after a 12-hour shift. Tall, silver-haired, radiating that specific brand of arrogance that only top-tier surgeons possess. He believed he held life and death in his hands. He believed he was untouchable. Rough day? I asked, pouring him a drink from the crystal decanter. Exhausting, he sighed, taking the glass without looking at me. Saved a senator's aorta today. The man was a ticking time bomb. If I hadn't been there... He trailed off, waiting for the applause. You're a miracle worker, darling, I said, handing him the glass. He took a sip, finally looking at me with those cold blue eyes. You look tired, Catherine, struggling with the new book. I told you maybe it's time to retire, relax a bit. I smiled. It was a razor-thin smile. Actually, the writing is going well. I just found the inciting incident. The villain, he's much closer than I thought. Jonathan chuckled, checking his watch, a gold timepiece worth more than most people's cars. Always the dramatist. Well, don't stay up too late killing people in your head. He set his drink down and pulled his phone out. A text message lit up the screen. He angled it away slightly, a reflex. Too fast. Too practiced. The hospital, he muttered. Post-op complications. I might have to take a call later. Of course, I said, sipping my water. He walked past me toward the stairs, leaving a trail of cold air and expensive cologne. He didn't know that I had seen the notification before he turned the screen. It wasn't the hospital. It was a contact saved simply as yoga. And hospitals don't usually send heart emojis. I watched him ascend the stairs, the man who thought he was the smartest person in the room. He had no idea. He was living in a tragedy, and he thought it was a romance. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't open my manuscript. I opened a blank document. Title, Project Widow. If he wanted a drama, I would give him a masterpiece. The following morning, the kitchen was filled with the aggressive hiss of the espresso machine, a chrome monster that cost more than my first car. Jonathan was standing by the island, scrolling through his tablet, looking entirely too pleased with himself for a Tuesday. I sat opposite him, sipping black coffee, observing him through the steam. To the untrained eye, he was Dr. Blackwood, preparing for another life-saving day at the hospital. To me, he was a character sketch that needed revising. "You're wearing the blue tie," I noted, buttering a piece of toast with deliberate slowness. "I thought you said that one was too flashy for the board meeting." Jonathan didn't look up. "Change of pace. A man has to evolve, Catherine. Stagnation is death." "Evolve." I repeated the word, tasting the irony. He was also wearing a new cologne. Something aquatic and sharp, distinct from the heavy woody scent he'd worn for 20 years. And his teeth, were they whiter? He looked like he'd been scrubbed, polished, and repackaged. It was the classic midlife crisis starter pack: the sudden interest in fitness, the grooming upgrade, and the vague philosophical statements about living in the moment. "I might be late tonight," he said, finally pocketing his device. "Administrative backlog. The chief of surgery is on my back about budget cuts." "Don't work too hard," I said. "We wouldn't want you to burn out before the grand finale." He frowned, missing the double meaning. "Right, see you later." He kissed the top of my head, a gesture that felt more like a habit than affection, and swept out of the room. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of the garage door closing and the purr of his German luxury sedan fading down the driveway. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't empty. It was filled with opportunity. I didn't clear the table. I walked straight to his home office. Jonathan believes he is a genius. And like many geniuses, he assumes everyone else is intellectually inferior. He locks his physical doors with complex alarm systems, but his digital life? He leaves it wide open, protected only by his own arrogance. I sat at his desktop computer. Password prompt. I didn't need a hacker. I knew my husband. He was a creature of ego. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried our anniversary. Incorrect. I snorted. Of course not. Then I tried the date he won the Surgeon of the Year award. Access granted. Predictable, I muttered, opening his browser history. He had cleared it, obviously. But he had forgotten that our devices were linked through a shared family cloud ecosystem, a feature I had insisted on years ago for photo storage. I pulled up the location history. He had disabled the GPS on his phone, likely thinking he was being stealthy, but he hadn't disabled the GPS on the car's navigation system, which synced to the desktop for maintenance updates. I pulled up the map of the last month. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the days he claimed to have administrative backlog, his car wasn't at the hospital. It was parked on the north side, in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. 1402 Wicker Park Avenue. I zoomed in on the street view. It wasn't a medical facility, it was a mixed-use building. On the ground floor, a trendy organic juice bar. On the second floor, the Lotus Flow, holistic yoga studio. I leaned back in the leather chair, steepling my fingers. So, yoga wasn't just a code name. It was literal. My 62-year-old husband, whose knees clicked when he walked up the stairs, was frequenting a holistic yoga studio. The mental image would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. I dug deeper. I opened the digital credit card statements for the joint account he thought I rarely checked. He was careful with the big numbers, but the small ones slipped through. $12.50, Green Goddess Smoothie. $120, Blue Lemon Athletica, women's size small. $250, Ticketmaster. 2 tickets to a specialized EDM concert. Electronic dance music. Jonathan hates anything louder than Mozart. The narrative was assembling itself. He wasn't just sleeping with someone, he was trying to become someone else. He was funding a fantasy version of himself, young, hip, flexible, using our retirement savings. I printed the map. I printed the statements. I placed them in a fresh manila folder labeled Research. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jonathan. Meeting dragging on. Might order dinner at the hospital. Don't wait up. Love you. I looked at the clock. It was 11:30 a.m. He wasn't in a meeting. He was probably doing a downward dog and trying not to throw out his back. I typed back. Understood. You're doing important work, darling. The world needs you. I hit send. Then I stood up and walked to the closet. I pushed aside my sensible wool coats and pulled out a trench coat I hadn't worn since my days following leads for the Chicago Tribune. I wasn't going to wait for the police report. I was going to the crime scene myself. I parked my nondescript sedan 3 cars down from the Lotus Flow. It was a gray afternoon in Chicago, the kind where the sky looks like a bruised peach. Wicker Park was alive with people who looked like they hadn't started paying taxes yet. Bearded men in flannel, women pushing strollers that cost more than my first book advance. I adjusted my sunglasses, though there was no sun. In this neighborhood, I was invisible. A woman of a certain age, in a trench coat, sitting in a domestic car? I was background noise. I checked my watch. 12:15 p.m. The lunch break Jonathan had claimed was blocked out for administrative meetings. 10 minutes later, the glass door of the studio swung open. And there he was. My breath hitched, not from heartbreak, but from sheer second-hand embarrassment. Jonathan was wearing streetwear. My husband, a man who starched his pajamas, was wearing fitted joggers and a hoodie that looked tragically expensive. He looked like a banker trying to dress like a barista to infiltrate a union meeting. He wasn't alone. Hanging onto his arm was a girl who couldn't have been older than 24. She was beautiful in a way that was entirely unearned, the effortless, collagen-rich beauty of youth. She wore leggings and a crop top, exposing a sliver of midriff, despite the freezing temperature. "So that's the muse," I whispered, raising my camera. I had swapped my phone for a DSLR with a telephoto lens, a relic from my journalism days. I snapped a rapid burst of photos. Click, click, click. They walked to a vegan bistro next door. I watched through the lens, zooming in until their faces filled my frame. Jonathan looked drunk. Not on alcohol, but on adoration. He was looking at her the way he used to look at his reflection after a successful surgery. He was feeding off her energy, vampire-like, trying to suck the youth right out of her pores to fill the hollow spaces inside himself. They sat at a window table, perfect for me, disastrous for them. The girl, let's call her Yoga for now, was animated. She was talking with her hands, making big, sweeping gestures. Then, the mood shifted. She stopped smiling. She leaned in, her face crumbling into a mask of tragic vulnerability. She placed a hand on her stomach. I froze. The pregnancy test. Jonathan's reaction was Oscar-worthy. He dropped his fork. He reached across the table, engulfing her small hands in his. His face went through a complex gymnastics routine. Shock, then fear, and finally, pride. The absolute fool. He didn't see a crisis. He saw a legacy. He saw proof that his virility hadn't withered, that he was still a creator of life, a god among men. "He thinks he's the hero of this story," I murmured, capturing the moment his ego swelled to fill the room. But then, I zoomed in closer on the girl. While Jonathan was gazing off into the middle distance, likely imagining himself pushing a stroller and confusing people into thinking he was the grandfather, the girl's expression changed. She looked down at her lap. A tiny, fleeting smirk played on her lips. It was gone in a microsecond, replaced by the tearful pout when Jonathan looked back at her. I lowered the camera. I knew that look. I had written that look into 3 different villains. It was the look of a gambler who just realized the house isn't watching the table. She was playing him. I looked at her stomach again. Flat. Taut. And if she was pregnant enough to get a dye stealer positive on a digital test, she probably shouldn't be drinking whatever dark green sludge the waiter just put in front of her, which likely contained unpasteurized ingredients, a big no-no for expectant mothers. "Interesting," I said, tapping the steering wheel. "A plot hole. If she was pregnant, she was careless. If she wasn't pregnant, she was a con artist. And Jonathan? He was the mark." A sudden, sharp grief pierced through my analytical armor. Not for the marriage, that was dead the moment he put on those ridiculous joggers, but for the dignity of it all. We were the Blackwoods. We were an institution, and he was risking it all for a girl who was likely checking his credit score while he checked her aura. I checked the photos one last time, crisp, clear, damning. I put the camera away and put the car in gear. I didn't need to see anymore. I had the inciting incident, the rising action, and the villain. Now I needed a partner to help me write the climax. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years, but never deleted. "Vivian," I said when the line connected. "It's Catherine. I need you to dust off your law degree and bring wine. We have a body to bury." "Figuratively speaking?" Vivian asked, her voice raspy with smoke and cynicism. "For now," I replied, merging into traffic. "For now." Vivian arrived at the estate exactly 40 minutes after my call. She didn't knock, she swept in like a weather front. Vivian is 59, a retired divorce attorney who was once known in the Chicago courts as the Guillotine. She wears bespoke suits, drinks her scotch neat, and regards men with the same suspicion one might reserve for a feral dog. We retreated to my library, a room lined with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves and the smell of old parchment. It was my sanctuary. Now it was our war room. "Show me," she said, bypassing pleasantries and settling into the wingback chair opposite me. I slid the manila folder across the heavy oak desk. Inside were the photos from Wicker Park, the credit card statements, and the printout of the pregnancy test receipt. Vivian flipped through them with practiced speed. She paused at the photo of Jonathan gazing adoringly at the girl. "Classic," she drawled, her voice dry as dust. "He looks like he's trying to remember what it feels like to have a functional libido. Who is she?" "I'm calling her the plot twist," I said, pouring us 2 glasses of a vintage Cabernet. "But her credit card trail says her name is Crystal. She's 24, yoga instructor, aspiring wellness influencer. And pregnant? Allegedly." Vivian took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "If she's pregnant, Catherine, the math changes. Jonathan has a God complex. He'll want to provide. He'll want to build a nest. And since he's currently leveraged up to his eyeballs on that new surgical wing investment, he's going to try to raid your joint assets to fund his second act." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. He wouldn't. The portfolio is marital property. Vivian cut in sharply. "In Illinois, equitable distribution applies. But if he starts siphoning cash now for investments or loans that disappear into Crystal's startup costs, you'll never see that money again. He's a surgeon, Catherine. He knows how to cut things out." I took a long sip of wine. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I looked at the rows of books surrounding us, stories where the detective always catches the killer. But in real life, the bad guys often win because the good guys play by the rules. "So, what do I do?" I asked. "File for divorce tomorrow? Freeze the accounts?" "No," Vivian smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. "If you file now, he goes on the defensive. He hides money. He fights you for every spoon. You need to be smarter. You need to help him dig his own grave." "Explain." "He wants to feel powerful, right? He wants to be the provider for this new young family." Vivian leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Let him. Encourage him to make a bad investment. Something risky. Something that requires him to put his name on the liability, while you secure the liquid assets." I understood immediately. It was a plot device I'd used in my 3rd book, The Silent Ledger. "He's been talking about a private medical practice," I mused. "A boutique clinic. High risk, high capital requirement. He asked me to co-sign a loan last month. I refused." "Change your mind," Vivian said. "Tell him you believe in his vision. Tell him you want to support his dream, but you want your name off the liability because of tax reasons related to your book royalties. Flatter his ego. Make him feel like the big man taking on the big risk. And while he's busy setting up his clinic, we move the safe investments, the bonds, the real estate deeds, into a trust for your protection. By the time he realizes the clinic is a money pit and the girl is expensive, you'll be untouchable." It was diabolical. It was perfect. It relied entirely on Jonathan's narcissism, his belief that he couldn't fail. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out the photo of Crystal sipping her green drink. "I don't think she's pregnant, or if she is, it's not what he thinks." Vivian picked up the photo. "A fake pregnancy? That's bold, even for a gold digger. She was drinking unpasteurized raw juice, and I saw her smirk when he wasn't looking. She's playing a game, Vivian, and if she's playing a game, she has a tell." "Then we need to find it," Vivian said, finishing her wine. "You handle the husband, I'll handle the girl. I still have a few private investigators on my payroll who owe me favors." I looked at my friend, this warrior in a silk suit. "Why are you helping me do this? You could be on a beach in Florida." Vivian stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Because, darling, men like Jonathan think women our age are invisible. They think we're just furniture in the houses they built. It's time we reminded them that the furniture can fall on them." She left as quickly as she arrived, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the blueprint for a war. I sat alone in the library. The door opened downstairs. Jonathan was home. "Catherine?" he called out, his voice tentative. I took a breath. I put the folder in the drawer and locked it. I adjusted my expression from scheming author to supportive wife. In here, darling, I replied warmly. I was just thinking about that clinic idea of yours. Maybe I was too hasty. The trap was set. Dinner was a masterclass in fiction. I had prepared a roast chicken with rosemary and lemon, simple, nostalgic, the kind of meal I used to make when we were first married and broke, living in a drafty apartment in Lincoln Park. Now, we were eating it off fine bone china in a dining room that could seat 20, but the air between us was thinner than ever. Jonathan was cutting into his meat with surgical precision, but I could see the restlessness in his hands. He was distracted, likely thinking about the text messages burning a hole in his pocket or the future he was building in his head with a woman half his age. You mentioned the clinic earlier, Jonathan said, not looking up. He was testing the waters. I took a sip of the red wine, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him look at me. I did, and I've been thinking, Jonathan, I was wrong. He blinked. He wasn't used to hearing those words. Wrong? I've been holding you back, I said, infusing my voice with a perfect blend of regret and admiration. You've been carrying that hospital on your back for years. You deserve your own kingdom, a place where you don't have to answer to a board of directors who don't understand your genius. Jonathan straightened in his chair. His chest puffed out slightly. The bait was taken. That's exactly it, Catherine. They stifle innovation. I have ideas, revolutionary ideas, that I can't implement there. Then you must do it, I urged, leaning forward, placing my hand over his. His skin felt cold. Build the Blackwood Institute. Make it your legacy. He smiled, a genuine, arrogant smile. It will require significant capital, the loan we discussed. No, I interrupted gently, not a joint loan. His smile faltered. But you just said? Listen to me, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If we co-sign, the bank will insist on conservative oversight. They'll want to audit my book royalties, my trust. It will slow you down. You know how risk-averse I am. I paused, watching the gears turn in his head. I think, I continued, we should restructure. You take the loan in your name, backed by the clinic's projected assets. I will sign a waiver releasing any claim to the clinic's future profits. In exchange, we keep the house and the retirement bonds in my name, just as a safety net. That way, when you make your millions, the board can't claim I have undue influence on your business. It will be yours, 100% yours. I saw the greed flash in his eyes. He wasn't hearing safety net. He was hearing 100% profit. He was thinking about how easy it would be to divorce me later if the clinic and its millions belonged solely to him, while I was left with just the boring bonds. It's risky, he said, feigning hesitation. But you make a valid point about the autonomy. I don't want your publishers poking around my business. Exactly, I soothed. Let me be the safety net. You be the star. You're very supportive, Catherine, he said, squeezing my hand. I appreciate that, truly. I just want you to be happy, I lied. I want you to feel young again. He withdrew his hand to check his phone. It vibrated against the mahogany table. He glanced at the screen and for a split second, a shadow of panic crossed his face. Is everything all right? I asked innocently. Fine, just a patient with elevated pressure, he muttered, shoving the phone back into his pocket. I actually need to go into the study and make some calls about the clinic. If we're going to do this, I need to move fast. Go, I said. Strike while the iron is hot. He stood up, energized, feeling like a titan of industry. He walked out of the dining room without clearing his plate. I remained seated. I picked up my wine glass and swirled the dark liquid. He had just agreed to take on millions of dollars in debt while legally insulating me from the fallout. He thought he was cutting me out of his future fortune. In reality, he was cutting himself out of our accumulated wealth. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Vivian. Got the background check on Crystal. You're not going to believe this. Call me when the coast is clear. It's not just a fake pregnancy. It's worse. I looked at the doorway where my husband had disappeared, dreaming of his new empire. Oh, Jonathan, I whispered to the empty room. You have no idea what you've just signed up for. I finished my wine, stood up and walked toward the kitchen to clean up the mess. But this time, I wasn't just cleaning up dinner. I was preparing to clean him out. The next morning, I met Vivian not at a bar, but at her penthouse overlooking the Chicago River. The city below was a grid of gray steel and dirty snow, but inside everything was sterile, white, and sharp. Vivian didn't offer me coffee. She handed me a heavy tablet. Her name isn't Crystal, Vivian said, lighting a slim cigarette. It's Kelly, Kelly Ann Miller. And she's not a 24-year-old single yoga teacher looking for love. I looked at the screen. A mugshot stared back at me. It was younger, less polished, without the expensive highlights, but the eyes were the same, predatory and hollow. Arrested 2 years ago in Florida, Vivian narrated as I scrolled. Fraud, extortion. Charges dropped because the victim, a 70-year-old real estate developer, didn't want the embarrassment of testifying. A professional, I whispered. My writer's brain was already connecting the dots. She targets older, wealthy men. The pregnancy is the hook. It gets better. Vivian blew a plume of smoke toward the ceiling. Swipe left. I swiped. A photo of Crystal, or Kelly, kissing a man outside a gym in Miami. He was young, muscular, covered in tattoos. Meet the husband, Vivian said. I froze. She's married? Legally and happily. His name is Jax. He's her manager. They run this as a team. She finds the mark, seduces him, gets pregnant, and then Jax shows up playing the angry brother or ex-boyfriend demanding hush money. Or, in the long con, she marries the mark, cleans him out, and disappears back to Jax. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Disgust, certainly, but also a dark amusement. Jonathan, the man who thought he was the smartest surgeon in the Midwest, was being played by a Bonnie and Clyde duo from Florida. But the pregnancy, I said, thinking back to the test. I found a positive test, a digital one. Vivian laughed, a harsh barking sound. Catherine, you can buy positive pregnancy tests online for $20. Prank websites. Or from pregnant friends. It's a prop. And biologically? I called in a favor with a friend at a clinic in Miami where she used to work briefly. Vivian lowered her voice. Kelly Ann Miller had a tubal ligation 3 years ago. She can't get pregnant, Catherine. It is physically impossible. Even Jonathan, the great heart surgeon, couldn't find a heartbeat in that womb. I set the tablet down. The silence in the room was deafening. Jonathan wasn't just having an affair, he was the victim of a sweetheart swindle. He was about to sign loans, liquidate assets, and destroy his reputation for a child that didn't exist and a woman who was laughing at him with her real husband every night. So, Vivian asked, leaning forward, do we tell him? If you tell him now, you save him. He'll be humiliated, sure, but he'll keep his money. And maybe, just maybe, he'll be grateful. I walked to the window. I watched the tiny cars crawling along Wacker Drive. I thought about the positive test in the tennis bag. I thought about the way he looked at me at dinner, like I was an obstacle to be managed, a line item to be erased. I thought about his arrogance, his belief that I was old, irrelevant, and easily manipulated. If I saved him now, he would learn nothing. He would claim he was a victim. He would eventually blame me for spying. And in a year, he'd find another Crystal. No, I said, turning back to Vivian. My reflection in the glass was cold, hard. No? Vivian raised an eyebrow. He wants to build an empire for her, I said smoothly. He wants to take out loans. He wants to leverage his reputation. Let him. Catherine, if he goes bankrupt, it could blow back on you. Not if we execute the separation of assets correctly, I replied. We let him sign the papers for the clinic next week. We let him transfer the seed money to her account. We let him dig the hole so deep he can never climb out. And then, I smiled, I'll introduce him to her husband. Vivian grinned. It was the grin of a shark sensing blood in the water. You're not writing a mystery anymore, Catherine. You're writing a horror story. It's not horror, I corrected, picking up my coat. It's justice. Poetic justice. I left Vivian's apartment with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just the wife anymore. I was the director. And I had just decided that the main character wasn't going to survive the third act. My phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. Great news. The bank approved the preliminary terms for the clinic. I'm meeting the realtor today. Life is moving fast. I typed back, my fingers flying across the screen. Wonderful, darling. Don't let hesitation slow you down. Follow your heart. I hit send. Follow your heart, I thought. Right off a cliff. The hospital charity gala was the kind of event where the champagne cost more than a mid-sized sedan and the smiles were sharper than scalpels. The ballroom of the historic downtown hotel was a sea of black ties and silk gowns, illuminated by chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen tears. I stood by a marble pillar, wearing a midnight blue velvet gown, a color chosen specifically because it photographed well and looked like morning. I held a glass of sparkling water, watching my husband hold court in the center of the room. Jonathan was radiant. He was surrounded by donors, board members, and younger doctors who looked at him with hero worship. He was laughing, one hand tucked casually in his pocket, the other gesturing expansively as he likely recounted a surgery that saved a nun or an orphan. "He looks like he's running for office," Vivian murmured, appearing beside me. She looked formidable in a sharp tuxedo suit, or posing for a statue. "He's running for the exit," I corrected. "He just doesn't know the door is locked." "Do you have the papers?" I patted my clutch. Inside, folded neatly, was the legal document Vivian had drafted. It was a masterpiece of legal entrapment. Titled Asset Separation and Liability Waiver, it looked like a document designed to protect him from my interference. In reality, it transferred the deed of our Gold Coast mansion and the entirety of our conservative investment portfolio to my sole ownership, in exchange for me waiving all rights to his future Blackwood Institute profits. And crucially, it assigned 100% of the debt for the clinic to him. "Now is the time," Vivian whispered. "He's high on adrenaline. His guard is down. Use the crowd." I nodded. I took a breath, transforming from the plotting author back into the devoted wife. I glided across the floor, cutting through the crowd. "Jonathan, darling," I said, slipping my arm through his. He turned, slightly annoyed at the interruption, until he saw the board chairman watching. Then the smile returned. "Catherine, you look stunning." "I have a surprise for you," I said, loud enough for the chairman to hear. "Ideally, I wanted to wait, but seeing you tonight, seeing how much everyone respects you, I couldn't wait." I led him to a quiet alcove near the terrace doors, but still visible to the room. I pulled the papers from my clutch. I also produced a heavy gold fountain pen, a gift I had given him 10 years ago. "What is this?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Freedom," I whispered, looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "I spoke to the lawyers. I told them I didn't want my caution to hold you back anymore. This document, it separates our assets. It gives you full, unencumbered ownership of the new clinic. No board oversight from my side. No need for my signature on your loans. It's all yours, Jonathan. The empire is yours." He looked at the papers. He saw the words sole ownership and waiver of spousal claim. Greed is a powerful anesthetic. It numbs the part of the brain that signals danger. He didn't read the clause about the immediate transfer of residential real estate or the assume all liability section. He just saw the finish line. He saw the millions he wouldn't have to share with me when he eventually left me for Kelly. "Catherine," he said, feigning emotion, "are you sure? This leaves you with, well, just the house and the old bonds." "I'm sure," I said, touching his cheek. "I believe in you. I want you to fly. I want you to crash," I thought. He took the pen. The heavy gold barrel caught the light. He uncapped it. "You're a good woman, Catherine," he said. He pressed the nib to the paper. The scratch of ink was the sweetest sound I had heard in months. He signed with a flourish. "Jonathan Blackwood, M.D. "Done," he said, handing the papers back to me. He looked relieved. He felt lighter. He thought he had just secured his future. "Done," I echoed, slipping the signed document back into my clutch. It was now ironclad. "I need to make a call," he said, checking his watch. "To thank the investors." "Go," I smiled. "Celebrate." I watched him walk out onto the terrace into the freezing night air. I knew exactly who he was calling. He was calling Kelly to tell her that the money was coming, that the obstacle, his wife, had just voluntarily stepped aside. Vivian stepped up beside me again. "Did he sign?" "He signed," I confirmed. "The house is mine, the bonds are mine, and the debt is his." "And the girl? Let's see how much she loves him when the credit cards stop working." I took a sip of champagne, finally allowing myself a taste. Across the room, the orchestra began to play a waltz. It was a dance of intricate steps and turning circles. Jonathan was dancing with a ghost, and I was holding the only thing that mattered, the deed to his reality. The morning after the gala was bright and brutally cold. The winter sun reflected off the frozen surface of Lake Michigan, creating a glare that was almost blinding. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was even colder. Jonathan came down the grand staircase at 8 a.m., dressed in his surgical scrubs, carrying his briefcase. He looked hungover but triumphant. likely still buzzing from the adrenaline of the night before. He expected the smell of coffee. He expected his dutiful wife to be reading the paper at the island. Instead, he found his luggage. 3 large vintage leather suitcases, the ones we bought for our honeymoon in Paris, were standing like sentinels by the front door. Next to them was a cardboard box filled with his essentials. His golf trophies, his framed degrees, and his collection of silk ties. I was standing by the door, wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a cup of tea. I wasn't smiling. "What is this?" Jonathan stopped halfway down the stairs, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "Spring cleaning? Or are we going on a trip?" "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady. "But you are." He frowned, descending the final steps. "Catherine, stop playing games. I have surgery in an hour." "You don't," I corrected. "I called your office. I told them you were taking a sabbatical for personal family matters. They were surprisingly understanding." His face flushed red. "You did what? You have no right." "I have every right," I interrupted, walking over to the console table where I had placed the final piece of evidence. "Especially since you are no longer a resident of this house." I picked up the manila folder Vivian had given me, the one containing the dossier on Kellyanne Miller and her husband, Jax. I tossed it onto the marble floor at his feet. It landed with a heavy slap. "Read it." Jonathan stared at the folder, then at me. The arrogance was starting to crack, replaced by a dawning horror. He crouched down and opened it. I watched him as he processed the information. The mugshot of Crystal, the marriage certificate to Jax, the photos of them kissing in Miami, and finally, the medical record from the Florida clinic confirming her tubal ligation. "She's not pregnant, Jonathan," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "She's sterile. She's been playing you since the moment you walked into that yoga studio. The baby, the future, the legacy, it's all fiction. And frankly, it's bad fiction. I would have rejected the manuscript in the first chapter." He stood up, shaking. The papers fluttered to the floor. This is a lie. You fabricated this." "Call her," I challenged. "Call her right now and ask to see the ultrasound. Ask to meet her doctor." He reached for his phone, then stopped. He knew. Deep down, under layers of narcissism, he knew. The smirks, the requests for money, the avoidance of doctors, it all clicked into place. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. The god was gone. Just a scared old man remained. "Catherine, I didn't know. I was foolish. It was a mistake. We can fix this. I'll end it today." "You already ended it," I said. "Last night, when you signed that agreement." "That?" He waved his hand dismissively. "That was just paperwork for the bank." "No," I smiled, and this time it was a smile of pure victory. "That was a binding post-nuptial agreement. You transferred the deed of this house and our investment portfolio to me. In exchange, you kept the clinic and all its debt. Since the clinic hasn't broken ground yet, and the seed money is likely already in Kelly's account, you are effectively homeless and broke." "You can't do this," he whispered. "I'm your husband." "You were my husband," I said, walking to the heavy oak door and pulling it open. The freezing wind rushed in. "Now you're just a character I've written out of the series." I pointed to the driveway. "Your car is outside. I suggest you go to her. Maybe her husband, Jax, has a spare room on his couch." "Catherine, please." He stepped forward, reaching for me. I stepped back, my expression turning to stone. "Get out, Jonathan, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." He looked at the open door, then at the luxury suitcases, then at me. He realized the power had shifted. The keys were in my hand, the money was in my name, the story was mine. He grabbed his bags, his movements jerky and pathetic. He dragged them out into the cold, the wheels clattering loudly on the stone steps. I didn't watch him load the car. I simply closed the door. Click. The lock engaged. The sound echoed through the foyer, a definitive final punctuation mark. I leaned my back against the door and exhaled. The house was silent, but for the first time in months, it wasn't empty. It was full of space. My space. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the phone, and dialed Vivian. "It's done," I said. "He's gone." "And?" Vivian asked. And I looked out the window at the gray sky. "I think I'm ready to write a new book." I didn't need to be there to see the crash. A good author knows that sometimes the most powerful scene is the one you watch from a distance. I sat in Vivian's office, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. On the large monitor on the wall, a live stream played. Vivian's private investigator was parked across the street from the loft on Wicker Park Avenue, the lens trained on the entrance of the building where the Lotus Flow was located. "Here he comes," Vivian said, pointing a manicured nail at the screen. Jonathan's German sedan pulled up to the curb. He didn't park well. The back wheel was up on the sidewalk. He stumbled out, looking disheveled in his expensive coat, dragging one of the leather suitcases. He looked like a refugee from a luxury catalog. He punched the code into the building's keypad. Red light. He punched it again. Red light. I watched him panic. He pulled out his phone and dialed. I could almost hear the voicemail picking up. Then the door opened. But it wasn't Kelly who stepped out. It was Jax, the brother. The husband. He was wearing a tight t-shirt that showed off sleeves of tattoos. He leaned against the doorframe, chewing gum, blocking Jonathan's path. Even through the grainy video, the body language was clear. Jax was the bouncer, and Jonathan was the drunk patron who had been cut off. "Look at his face," I whispered, leaning forward. "He's confused? He still thinks he has authority." Jonathan was gesturing wildly. He pointed at the suitcase. He pointed upstairs. Jax laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive motion. He said something short, then stepped back and slammed the heavy metal door in Jonathan's face. Jonathan stood there, frozen. The king of the operating room had just been locked out by a grifter in sweatpants. "But wait," Vivian grinned. "The encore is coming." On the screen, Jonathan turned back to his car. He pulled out his wallet. He was likely trying to book a hotel, a suite at the Peninsula or the Ritz, somewhere to nurse his wounded ego. He held his phone to his ear. Suddenly, he pulled the phone away and stared at it. He tapped the screen furiously. "I took the liberty of contacting the bank an hour ago," I explained calmly. "Since the new asset separation agreement went into effect at midnight, and the bank noticed unusual activity, specifically, an attempt to wire $50,000 to a suspicious account in Florida. They froze his personal lines of credit pending verification. And since the house is now yours..." Vivian trailed off. "His billing address is invalid," I finished. On the screen, Jonathan slumped against the cold brick wall of the yoga studio. He slid down until he was sitting on the dirty pavement, his $3,000 suitcase beside him. He looked at his reflection in the dark window of the vegan bistro next door. He wasn't the dashing silver fox anymore. He was just an old man, shivering in the Chicago wind, with no home, no wife, no mistress, and a credit card that was nothing more than a piece of plastic. My phone rang. It was him. Vivian looked at me. "Are you going to answer?" I looked at the ID, Jonathan, mobile. I thought about the 35 years, the dinners I hosted, the lies I swallowed, the arrogance I polished. "No," I said, pressing the decline button. I opened my messaging app instead. I typed one final message to him. "The locks have been changed. The assets have been transferred. Your lawyer can contact mine on Monday. Do not come to the house or I will have you arrested for trespassing. P.S. Kelly's real name is Miller. Enjoy your freedom." I watched the screen. Jonathan looked at his phone. He read the message. His shoulders shook. Was he sobbing or screaming? It didn't matter. The character arc was complete. He had wanted a plot twist. He got one. "Turn it off," I said to Vivian. The screen went black. "Well?" Vivian said, pouring herself a scotch. That was satisfying. "What now?" I stood up and smoothed my skirt. "Now? I have a deadline. My publisher has been waiting for a tragedy, and I think I finally know how to write the ending." I walked out of the office, stepping into the winter sun. The air was cold, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel the chill. I felt the fire. 6 months later, the light hitting my face was different. It wasn't the harsh gray glare of a Chicago winter, but the warm, golden embrace of the Tuscan sun. I sat on the terrace of a rented stone villa overlooking the rolling vineyards of Chianti. On the table in front of me lay a fresh manuscript, a fountain pen, and a copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves. The air smelled of cypress and wild rosemary. My phone buzzed. It was Vivian. "You're missing the snow," she said, her voice crackling over the international line. "It's a blizzard here. I can barely see the river." "I'm heartbroken," I teased, reaching for my espresso. "How is the cleanup going?" "Clean as a whistle," Vivian reported with satisfaction. "The divorce was finalized yesterday. The judge wasn't amused by Jonathan's attempts to claim duress over the postnup. Apparently, being a board-certified surgeon implies you have the mental capacity to read a contract before signing it. And the clinic? Bankrupt before it opened. The bank seized the lease. And Jonathan? He's currently renting a studio apartment in the suburbs. He's taking shifts at an urgent care center. From god of cardiology to stitching up cut fingers on weekends. It's humbling. I felt a twinge of pity, but it was distant, like reading about a tragedy in a newspaper from 50 years ago. And the girl, Kelly? Disappeared. Jax and she moved on to a new zip code. The police are looking into them for another scam involving a lottery winner in Ohio. Jonathan was just a pit stop. Good, I said softly. Let him be a cautionary tale. I hung up the phone and looked out at the horizon. The silence here was different too. It wasn't empty. It was full of potential. I had spent 35 years editing myself to fit into Jonathan's margins. I had made myself smaller so he could feel big. I had played the supporting character in his melodrama, but now the page was blank and I held the pen. Signora Blackwood? I turned. The owner of the villa, a silver-haired man named Matteo with kind eyes and hands stained with earth from his garden, was standing there. He held a basket of fresh figs. For you, he said, his English heavily accented but warm. From the tree, they are sweet today. Thank you, Matteo, I smiled. You write all day, he observed gently, pointing to my notebook. A mystery? No, I shook my head, closing the leather cover. I'm done with mysteries. I'm done with bad guys hiding in the shadows. Then what is it? A story about a woman who wakes up, I said. A survival guide. Matteo smiled. That sounds like a bestseller. He lingered for a moment, the sunlight catching the silver in his beard. There was no arrogance in him, no need to dominate the space, just a quiet strength. Would you care to join me for a glass of wine later? He asked, a respectful hesitation in his voice. My family makes it. It is simple, but honest. 6 months ago, I would have said no. I would have worried about propriety, about rushing, about what people would think. But Catherine, the surgeon's wife, was gone. She had been left behind in that cold hallway in Chicago. I would love that, I said. He nodded, pleased, and walked back toward the garden. I picked up my pen. I didn't open the manuscript. Instead, I wrote a single sentence on the back of a napkin, a reminder to myself. The cage was never locked. You just had to push the door. I took a bite of the fig. It was sweet, ripe, and tasted like life.